Hello, everyone. My name is GIlbert Castellanos, and I'm the artistic curator for the San Diego Symphony's Jazz at the Jacobs, and soon to premiere Jazz at the Shell. It is my honor and pleasure to be in the company of jazz royalty. Not only have these two living legends been a major influence on my career, but I also consider them family. They both live in the San Diego area and have also performed for the San Diego Symphony's Jazz at the Jacobs series multiple times. As a matter of fact, the two of them performed for the first ever Jazz at the Jacobs concert back in 2015. Please welcome Marshall Hawkins, who has performed with Miles Davis, Shirley Horn, Roberta Flack, Manhattan Transfer, and Donny Hathaway, just to name a few. My second guest has performed with Charles Mingus, Kenny Drew, Art Farmer, Lionel Hampton, and the list goes on and on. He has also performed on Clint Eastwood's Bird movie soundtrack based on the life of Charlie Parker. Please welcome Charles McPherson and Marshall Hawkins.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Marshall and I were talking about Birdland, 1960, 1961. And I don't remember meeting Marshall then. I was working with Mingus. But I met Marshall in, I think it was Seattle, Washington.
Correct.
At a club called, was it Jazz Alley or something?
It could have been Parnell's.
That's what, I'm sorry. It was Parnell's. Yeah. You were on the gig. You were part of the rhythm section.
Yes.
Wow.
And I was a guest, and I officially met Marshall then. Yeah. And that's been, what, 30 years ago or more? Or whatever.
At least. Yeah, that was because of Richie Cole. He went to New York.
Oh, okay.
To play a concert in Carnegie Hall. And that's how we met.
Oh, okay.
What was it like to play in Miles Davis's quintet, Marshall, especially like in the 60s, which happens to be the same time frame of the civil rights movement?
Well, that was a Nefertiti band. I was sort of like a replacement for Ron Carter at the time. Ron was on contract in, Atlantic Records, and he was doing a lot of stuff and probably didn't want to travel as much as he did in the past, 4 or 5 years. Because that band was together for about 4 or 5 years at Nefertiti Band with Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams, Miles, and of course Ron Carter. And I replaced him in probably 1968 when he decided he didn't want to travel anymore. So to answer your question about playing with Miles, it was very different, to say the least. Shirley Horn was tougher for me because she and Miles were very close friends, but Shirley had this manner of playing music that we probably Charles spoke about before we came on the air, about, this mindset, this consciousness. And from her, I learned how to play in Miles Davis's band, because the only thing that he wanted me to do was to be of high consciousness. And his word to me was, play what you hear, Marshall. Just play what you hear. Don't think about nothing else. Just play what you hear. So I would imagine I played everything I knew on my first song. So it was okay.
Okay. What about Charles? The same question for you, Charles. Your involvement with Charles Mingus at that same time period.
Yes. Well, Mingus was an interesting figure. He was a great bassist and great composer. So I learned a lot about composing and composition from Mingus. Mingus also was very political. Mingus wrote songs about racism, civil rights. He wrote poetry about it. And he would, that was part of our musical program. When we would work concerts, clubs, not only would we play his music, a lot of his music was also protest. And he had things to say about Governor Faubus, for instance, the governor of Arkansas. George Wallace, he had tunes with lyrics that basically were chastising these people and bringing it to mind how wrong and unfair all this was. So Mingus was very political, besides being a great musician, and but he had strong things to say, and he did it. Yeah. He said them. He had no fear or about what anybody thought about it. And Mingus drew well. He had his audiences, that loved Mingus, and Mingus could do what he wanted to do. And he did, he played, great music, great bassist, of course, but he was very politically aware, and he used his platform for showcasing his music, but also his views and feelings.
What about being on the road with Mingus at that time period? Did you guys experience like just anything that was in a negative context, as far as like being in states or even cities where there's like major like segregation and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, Mingus experienced certain things personally, but as a band, as a group, I cannot remember anything that's outstanding while my involvement with Mingus dealing with any kind of racial, overt racism. And I use the term overt. I don't remember any of that. In terms of music and playing jazz and just connecting the racism and how it impacts music, it was more for me before I started playing with Mingus, and when I was a younger player in Detroit. And when I say young, I mean 15, 16, 17 years old, 18 years old, living in Detroit in the early 50s and mid 50s is when I experienced, certain kinds of racism. The scenario quite often would be this. We're riding in the car with a bunch of musicians on the way to the gig. And there would be white and black musicians in the car, because we played together. We played music together. The drummer, one of my best friends to this day, is a white drummer named Rudy Tusich. Well, we grew up together. We grew up in Detroit. He was the drummer. It might be somebody else white in the band, and then 3 or 4 black guys. So we're on our way to the gig. Now, this would happen on a regular basis. We're driving the car. And in those days in Detroit, there were plane detectives that rode around in unmarked cars. These were not uniformed policemen. These were detectives. And the only way you would recognize them is they would have an aerial, like a radio aerial on the back that's very tall, and you can know that's their radio. So you knew that was the police. And it would be 4 of them. They were called the Big Four. 2 guys in the front, 2 guys in the back. So these guys would parole and drive around. Now, here's the scenario. We're on our way to the gig. Maybe we stop at a red light. Next to us, the Big Four pulls up. Now, when they look over and see the raciality of the car is mixed, that right there is a red flag. Yeah. That's an automatic stoppage. So right there, and we know that's going to happen. It's like clockwork. So what they do, they see that, and for them it's like, what's wrong with this picture? What are black people and white people doing in the same car? Something must be wrong. This is it every time with clockwork. So it meant roll down the window, pull over to the. We pull over now, and then they make us get out of the car. We did not have any marijuana, no weed, none of that, because we knew that you're going to be a target just because it's the interraciality of the people. You get stopped, and that's all they want to do is find any kind of narcotics or weed, anything at all. And in those days, you would go to jail for 5 years for a little half a marijuana joint, So we knew not to have any of that. We weren't doing it anyway. But anyway, we knew not to have that. And sure enough, the cops say, all right, get out of the, get out of the, okay, we'd get out of the car. They have us on the car. And the first thing they would say, what are you doing? Meaning, basically what that means is, what are you doing together?
Yeah.
That's really it. And then we say, we're on our way to the gig, sir. And then that would be a reason that they would understand. It's like, oh, these are musicians. Now, they already are used to black and white musicians being together, especially these jazz musicians. So they're used to that a little bit. So when we say that, then that makes, oh, this is why they're together. But the very next thing that comes to their mind is, well, they must be into drugs. And so the search would happen. And they go in our pockets and look for things. Now, we would not have anything in our pockets. When they got through doing that, it was almost like they were madder because we didn't have anything. Because there's nothing for them to say. They can't do anything. They can't arrest us. Basically, they have to get back in the car. So the only thing they could say is look at us and say, all right, get on out of here, and that's it. And that would happen all the time, just with people wanting to play music. And, they're black and white, jazz is about, it has nothing to do with the color. It's got something to do with the human beings. If you can play the music and there's a symbiosis, then welcome. That's it. That's another thing about jazz. It's more welcoming than a lot of other institutions in this country. Yeah. And even back then, it was more welcoming. And the powers that be did not understand that and didn't particularly like it. Mm-hmm. And I can remember that a lot as a youngster. As I said earlier, when I started playing with Mingus, I didn't experience that with Mingus, with his group. But I'm sure Mingus did, because he's 20 years older than I am. Yeah. So that's just, there it is,
Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Charles. Thank you.
You're welcome.
How did the civil rights movement impact the music at that time? Did you see it like having a major influence? For example, Freddie Hubbard in 1964, I believe, he wrote a tune when he was with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers entitled "The Core," C-O-R-E. It stood for Congress of Racial Equality.
Yeah, I remember that organization. Yeah.
And I'm just curious to see if there was anything like that you experienced as far as, like the civil rights movement being a huge influence on the music.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna let Marshall, you can address that.
Oh, well, I tell you what, that's a good question. I can sort of speak for myself in a lot of ways. At age 15, 16, 17, Charles was well on his way. Probably then as a professional musician, and we share a same teacher, which I will talk about later. But 1954 was when it really happened to me. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and that was, of course, the Brown versus the Board of Education. And so I remember going to high school in Anacostia, because I'm from Washington D.C. And the band director was an old retired sergeant from the Marines. And there was a bass in the corner, and that's what I wanted to play. I wanted to play that bass. But for some reason that I didn't internalize until years later, he told me, you can't play the bass. And he handed me a set of drumsticks. I said, oh, okay. So maybe that was one of his, messages, like, you play the drums, you will not play the bass. Do not touch the bass. I mean, he was really strong about my not being able to play on that bass. But in 1954, we having riots and all this stuff now. Then in D.C., I was getting shot at. So I understand what it really feels like. And the fact that I didn't graduate from high school is because my United States history teacher would not accept my question about why aren't there more black people, or I use the word Negroes, in these books that you're teaching us, and he failed me. So from that point, I kind of knew, what was really happening, with the music. Because by the time I got to high school, I had heard so much music. I was in the Howard Theater and didn't realize why I was sitting in the balcony until years later, because with separatism, I mean, we couldn't sit with white people, so we had to sit in the balcony. Then after I became a professional musician, this is another one. The unions were segregated, 163-710, the black union and the white union. For some reason, I had to join that union 3 times. They kept putting me out.
Wow.
For whatever the reason. I was a new kid on the block, and I was very fortunate because when I picked up the bass to play, it was like I'd been playing it all my life. Okay, so I was working right away because I'm coming from piano, organ, drums, singing in church choirs, so on, da da da. All of that was reduced to one note at a time, and a greater responsibility, I might add. But that union, I had to join that union. They just kept kicking me out. If I was one day late paying my dues, they would kick me out of the union. That was my greatest experience in Washington, D.C. as a musician when it comes to racism. I mean, because all of the officials, except for maybe some of the satellite guys who may have been African American, they were all white people. And they just kept kicking me out. I was a new boy on the block, and they didn't like the idea. I think I was terribly overqualified at the time. When I look back on it, back in D.C. in 1964 is when I started playing the bass. And I became a professional musician overnight. I mean, literally overnight. So when the guys in D.C. found out about it, I was bucking headwinds for, I guess after I joined Miles, the union never contacted me about paying dues ever again.
Really?
For some reason.
Wow.
And now I'm getting retirement checks, so I'm okay.
There you go.
Beautiful. Wow.
But that was mean. Because every time they put you out of the union, you can't work. And
Right.
if you go and work on a gig and you're a non-union, they will find everybody else that you work with.
It's true.
That was hard. I mean, I was crushed. Might seem subtle to some people, but that was crushed. That crushed me.
That's a chapter for your book.
Oh yeah. I think a lot of musicians can identify with that whole journey. Those are the things that I had to sort of internalize, but at the same time I had to dismiss it, because going back to what Charles had to say before we were on air about this consciousness. You see, I was raised a certain way. I was raised in the church, so there were certain things that there was a ramrod of truth in me about how to deal with people who didn't care about you. So I had a lot of negative experiences, but those negative experiences ended up being something positive for me today, even as we speak. So, Miles, he kept things to himself. We weren't exposed to the things that he was exposed to, because by the time we played with Miles, he had been through a lot of stuff, when it comes to racism. I mean, people just didn't like him, for whatever their reasons, And to go back to Mingus, I really, really adored what he did, because the first time I heard Mingus's music, I was 12 years old.
Wow.
So I heard so much music. By the time I was, 12 years old, I'm sitting in the Howard Theater in Washington, D.C., listening to Hampton, listening to Cab Calloway, which years later I'm riding on his bus. As a kid, I heard his music, and then here I'm a professional musician riding on his bus. And, it's just, I just feel so blessed to have made this journey. But I was totally aware of the racism. And I got it, big time. Living in Anacostia, we're surrounded by all whites. I lived in a little place called Berry Farms. And out of Berry Farms came doctors and astronauts and Peaches and Herb and all of us. There was a bunch of us that came out of that little community. And the reason why I was in such culture shock when I went to high school is because if you don't know what a huckster is, these are people that bring food to you during World War II and so forth and so on. So we had Germans, Italians, and Jewish people coming to our neighborhood to bring us food. So
Wow.
by the time I got to high school, it was a total culture shock, because I knew it was there, but it hit you straight in the face, when they said, we don't want you here, and then you hear gunshots. So
Hmm.
that's kind of my little spiel on, my experience. This is even before I became a professional musician. However, I must say God gave me this talent, and I've been a musician all my life, and I just had to be obedient, find it, and go for it.
How has being a Black American
Okay.
affected or impacted what you do as an artist and educator?
Let me see. Well, as an artist, the only thing I can say is everything, everything that you are, everything that you think, your experiences, your life experiences, how you feel about yourself, how you feel about others, how you feel about the world at large, your worldview shapes who you are. And as an artist, that has to impact what you hear, how you hear it, what you think about what you hear. So in that regard, everything is everything. As an educator, I don't know if I've never thought about how me being African American affects how I teach or what I teach. I'd have to think about that again, think about that. What I do, as a teacher, I just teach. I find a way to say 10 words or less to a student who knows less than I, and find 10 words or less that cause the epiphany. Mm-hmm. And I do it from a real pure, I try not to have any baggage with that. It's just me giving knowledge and my take on what I'm teaching. I just kind of approach it that way. It's kind of non-political, non-gender, there's nothing to do with, any of that. It's just is what it is. But as a player, that's different because now I'm a human being expressing my what life means to me from my particular point of view. So being an African American in this society, born when I was born, experience what I experienced, well, without a doubt that affects everything you do, positive, negative. So you are a product of all of this. For me, I'm glad. I will say this. In terms of being an artist, a lot of times because a lot of what art is expressing very deep and sometimes dark emotions, because the human being is a complicated piece of work. Yeah. We feel joy, we feel hate, we feel pain, we feel pleasure, we feel ecstasy, we feel everything. So as an artist, if one wants to really be an artist with dimension, then to me, you're supposed to use your medium, which is music for me, and be able to express the total human condition. Everything, hate, joy, mysticism, eroticism, agape, ecstasy, everything that a human being feels. You're supposed to be able to take music, tone, harmony, sound, and be able to express any one of those human emotions. So the experience as an African American in this country during the period, I was born in 1939, those experiences, negative or positive, added to me as a human being, and it's added dimension to me. So some of the negative feelings that I might have experienced because of oppression of any kind has taught a certain lesson to the human soul. Mm-hmm. And so what it has done, as far as I'm concerned, it has broadened the scope of emotionality where you understand the darkest, deepest depression, hopeless feeling that there is, that a human can feel. Because you got to realize that being subjected to that kind of oppression for that long, and for all of the negative stuff to be handed down generation to generation. In terms of how bad one can feel, how dark it can be, or how deep of uncomfort things can be, you know exactly where that is. You've been there. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the only thing that a human being has to beat all of that negativism is to learn to have the capacity for joy. Even so, and this is what makes a human being an interesting piece of work, because a lot of times the most darkest depression space that you can be in, to survive that, the mind must be able to partake in the level of joy and ecstasy. That's a great level, a great capacity for that as well, to balance all that off. So when I think about jazz music, one of the things that makes it great to me is that it truly reflects the modes and the different levels of emotionality in human beings, from the deepest, darkest, unhappiest is where, and also, God help me, I have no one but you. I have nothing else but you. Please help me. Mm-hmm. That's where the blues was born from.
Yes.
The spirit gospels were born from that feeling. I have nothing but you, help. Yeah. And that feeling there means that when it comes to writing music, dealing with those very deep feelings, there's an advantage. Because of in a way, even though you can feel the negativeness of that, but since you've been there, when you get ready to write some music and choose the right chord and the right notes, you're doing it not because of musical, this is a chord, this is A minor with a half diminished. You're doing it because what I feel, an A minor half diminished expresses that mode, that feeling, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. And in terms of joy and ecstasy, the other end of the spectrum, you can really be there in that space. And so that's a broad range of emotionality and dimension. So the experience, in one way, there's a negative thing about it, but in another way, it's a very important human lesson. So it's a very interesting thing. Everything balances off. Everything can be turned into a positive. And in that way, as an artist, African-American artist, that's what I have to do, is turn that whole experience into a positive, and also let the dimension and understanding of the human condition, let that be an advantage, because I've felt the rock bottom and I've also felt the top and everything in the middle. Yeah. And that enriches you as a human, no matter what color you are, what gender you are, and it definitely enriches you as an artist.
Wow, Charles.
Yeah, Charles, that's heavy.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Beautiful. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah.
As an African American, I've had a lot of experiences, and this is what, Charles, you really spoke deeply on, because those are your treasures. Those are the things that you use as subject matter when you're playing music. But let's stay with how this affects me as an artist. I've always felt that when there was a time when things were really bad, that's when I became really still. I came really still, and Charles made the most applicable statement. I leave it to God at that point and say, okay, what do I do? Where do I go next? I just be still, and I listen for this answer. And if you listen hard enough, you'll get it. No matter where you are, I'm in scriptures. I love the scriptures, and I know that the Lord is not going to put on me any more than I can bear. I know that. So I can take that one to the bank. But let's move into this thing of this instrument that I play, which helps me to reflect this part of this African American person. And as a bass player, I'm trying diligently to be invisible. Now, how do you do that? You try your best to play in the moment. Your consciousness is so open that you're the one that's holding everything above you in order. Because the bass technically is a rhythm instrument, and it's responsible for the harmonic concept of all the music. So the responsibility we have as bass players, or as I have as a bass player, is to be really still and be this conduit so that the likes of Charles McPherson and all these other musicians can tell their story. So it's like I've made this commitment, and I've made this sacrifice, and I've made this, so I surrendered to that, to be invisible as a bass player. And so that's my personality as an African American in jazz, is to, you've not seen a CD I've recorded. You've not seen one. You never will. Because now we're into my teaching. My students are my CDs. And I've just completed my 34th and going into my 35th year at the Idlewild Arts Academy. And our academy represents more than 37 countries. So I've been teaching kids all over the world for the last 34 years.
Amazing.
And what I do is with the reality that no one shoe fits all. No one shoe fits all. So when you're teaching a student or you're disclosing information and really giving them the strong teaching, giving them an example of a good teaching background, you make sure that you approach them on their respective level. This is what God does. He comes where you are. He's going to love you whether you like him or not, or love him or not. Well, this is what I do. I love these kids on their respective levels so that they can grow to be who they are. No matter how good or how long it takes, it has no bearing on the outcome other than the fact that the outcome is going to be positive, just like Charles said. It's going to be a positive. So I sort of teach the same way I play the bass, very silently. I have fun with the kids. I never raise my voice, and whenever I do, believe me, they know it. That's kind of how I do things. I think about Miles's album in a silent way, and I think about some wonderful things that Charles said. I wish I could internalize all of it, but when I think about John Coltrane, I think about a moment's notice. Because at a moment's notice, this is what Charles was talking about. It's not about what you've done or what's going to happen. It's now, ways of right now. This is what's going on. This is what we have to deal with right now.
Living in the moment.
I'll leave you with this one. For the fourth time in 34 years, I was voted by the school to be keynote speaker for baccalaureate. And I did, some pretty amazing things in the first couple of times. I even used my bass. I played my bass the first time, and I played my bass the last time. The last time I played my bass, the message was during this time, during this virus. Now, I didn't touch on the virus too much, but what I did touch on was the power of technology. And I needed my students to be cognizant of one point. The technology has helped us, and I praise technology for the moment that we were having at the moment, this moment that I'm able to speak to you through technology because of this virus. I praise technology, but remember one thing. Technology is robbing you of your memory. See what you can do about keeping a healthy memory. How far back in your memory can you go as a child? Da-da-da-da-da-da. Don't lose your cell phone. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Now that message was to keep my kids on track. This virus is going to pass. They got to be ready to hit the ground running when this is over. They cannot be in the past. Their consciousness has to be hitting the ground running when this is over. So in my baccalaureate speech, I ended with saying one thing, because the speech was dealing mostly with memory. And I said to them, use memory to salute intelligence.
Marshall, I'll ask you a question, then I'll ask Charles a separate question. But how has the history of racism in America affected the history of jazz?
There are several musicians. I have some students that are experimenting with some things. What I'm enjoying with my students is that they are sort of doing like the same things that I've been doing for the last maybe 25, 30 years. I was very fortunate to have gone a long way after having played the bass 4.5 years. And six months after I picked up the bass, I was with Shirley. And then 4 years later, I was in Miles Davis's band. So I was probably the youngest bass player, you know, in terms of being a professional. I had been playing the bass 4.5 years. Well, from that point, when I was away from that band, I started my trek all the way back past Charlie Parker and everybody. Well, I have a lot of students that are doing that now. They're going back to the basic. They're going back to the roots. They're going all the way back to the roots to see what they can do about taking a snippet from those roots to sort of create things in now.
Right.
So that's kind of the experience I'm having with just my students. But that's a very powerful question, man. I'm still a kid. Just in my second childhood, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to pan out. But that's a pretty powerful question, buddy. I find it very interesting, and I feel honored that it happens. No matter where my kids are from, all over the world, the first thing that they seek the source, and they want to know who the African American musicians were who were responsible for this, and they dig deep to find out who they are. That knocks my socks off. And I don't have to tell them to do it. They just do it. They know that this music was created by African American people. Right. However, this music has a ubiquitousness about it that, you know, it takes a heart. If you got the heart, it doesn't matter what color you are. It's the heart. It's in there. It's the heart. If that heart is, you know, that's the magic and the wonder of this music that was created by African American people. That's all I can say about that one.
Charles, do you have any words of wisdom for young musicians today on navigating a musical career as an African American musician?
Well, I would pretty much, my advice to a young musician, no matter what they were, would be certainly to understand everything that they can about the music business. To understand all of the ways that music is generated nowadays. It's not the same as it was years ago. You got all the streaming, digital, you got all these different modes of how music is used and the many ways that money is generated, and how a lot of people can become rich because of music. And I think it's important for the young person who's serious about having a career in music, art, and jazz in particular, since we're talking about that, to really learn as much about that as possible. Now, that's just the business of music. The other part is there's a lot of ways to use music as a livelihood. And it doesn't always have to mean standing up in a bar trying to play countdown. There's a lot of ways to make money. You can teach, you can write, you can orchestrate. You can play countdown in a club. Also, there's a lot of ways. So for the young person, I would have them think a lot about how they want to use music and how will they take care of themselves playing music. Be in touch with yourself and to know thyself in that regard. That's important. And now, having said that, the craft of music, whatever it is that you want to do, you have to be thoroughly in touch with how to get all of the concrete concepts of practicing and using the mind to be able to play, write, and do these things well. That's what I would say to any young musician, and definitely, certainly, the African American musician for sure.
Mm.
That's
Thank you
good.
for that.
Yeah, that's
Hmm.
good,
Thank you.
Charles. That's so good.
Okay.
Marshall, would you like to add anything to that?
No, no, I mean that was good, man. That was really good. I'm a victim of not knowing the business the way I would like to because of having come into being a professional musician when I did and how I did. You know, it was like overnight I was gone. I was in there. I was with the big boys.
Yeah. Wow.
Well,
You know,
me as well.
yeah. You see, we share that.
Yeah. If someone had told me earlier and made it, really said it in a loud voice, not a little small whisper, maybe I would have been more, proactive in learning more about the business.
Yeah.
I got my own publishing company. I finally learned quite a bit, but as a real youngster, I didn't know anything about publishing or any of those, BMI. I didn't know about getting a business. I didn't know about those things. Horace Silver is basically is the guy who told me a lot, because Horace, as well as a great composer and pianist, and great jazz musician, was very much the astute businessman. And he's the one who actually told me how to get a business license, put an ad in the paper saying doing business as, get a publishing, own your own publishing. And, I didn't know any of these things. So what we say to students is important, not only about music and the craft of music, but also these things that we're talking about the business aspect. And as a black musician, of course, it's almost like there are challenges, and we have to admit that for the African American musician, because there are challenges for the African American that's not a musician. We know that. I mean, really. So you actually have to really be really on the case in learning about these things. Because there's a certain, there's some invisible walls up, even unconscious walls that are up. And so you really do have to know how to navigate, with everything. You have to be very, very aware.
Yeah, this music is so powerful. I mean, even like from my humble standpoint on jazz, it's like I posted a video about 2 months ago on social media, and I listed all my influences that, the people that have made me who I am on my instrument. I'm, playing the trumpet, people like Fats Navarro, Clifford Brown, Dizzy Gillespie, Art Farmer, Freddie Hubbard, Lee Morgan, Roy Eldridge. I think I named like 30 trumpet players, maybe 40. And in my video, I pretty much said, these are my major influences that have made a huge impact on me being a musician. And this is what it would sound like without these influences. And it was a video of me playing my trumpet, but I wasn't playing. All you can hear were crickets. Because that's the truth. It's like for me, African American music is who I am as well. From being around the music. My father was a huge, jazz fan, and I grew up around the music. Being born in Guadalajara, I mean, my father wanted me to be a jazz musician because I had 5 older sisters and 1 younger. So I was the chosen one. But my point is that jazz is so powerful in many ways, and you can get the political statement out by just playing the music.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah. And another great thing about jazz music, since it's involving the collective improvisation, that's a very interesting term, collective improvisation. So the interesting thing about jazz is that it's a combination of many things. It's a combination of very organized, worked out, very concrete musical laws. But at the same time, there's this freedom of improvisation that's working within the confines of musical law.
Yeah.
Also, the individual, as in terms of soloing and expressing your own thoughts, the individual and whatever that means intellectually, what it means in terms of the human condition, the expression of the individual is very important in this music. At the same time, the expression of the collective symbiotic aspect is also part of it. So look at all the different moving parts. You have organization mixed with freedom of thought. You have the collective concerns, the collective aspect, but you also have the individual aspect. You actually have in like a microcosmic concept, the greatest machinery and positive machinery that human beings can come up with. Right there in the music, it's the expression of the individual, but at the same time, the importance of collective thought. You have organization, which you must have, and then you have within organization creativity at the same time. Yeah. So you have chaos, which is all the millions of possibilities that the universe offers. You have organization, meaning the mind takes out of chaos and undifferentiated matter and forms a concept. And you have improvisation. So you have order, you have organized chaos, which is some extremely intelligent stuff right there. You have, and also when you look at what jazz is, musically, it's a combination of European influences, combination of African influences. It's a combination of world influences, all into musical gumbo, and fashioned, thought about, conceived, and executed. You have the greatest input of human beings culturally, all in part of what that musical gumbo soup is. And then you got the element of organization and improvisation. It's, how can you beat that?
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah. How do you, that is really something. You're using the left brain, that part of mentation. You're using the right brain, that part of mentation. You're using the analytical mind, that kind of mentation. You're using the subconscious mind, that kind of mentation. All of these things, athleticism is being used, left hand, left side, right side, everything is being used and then orchestrated so that you have within laws, you have freedom, and you have the aspect of the individual and the collective and a certain symbiosis that's bringing it all together. And you are expressing the human condition. How can you beat that? When it's right, it's a great music. When it's right. When it's not right, that's a lot of responsibility when you think about it.
Right.
So it's very easy for it not to be right because of all those moving parts. But when it is right, it's absolutely spectacular.
Professor McPherson, thank you. Wow.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to introduce these great musicians. We have on bass the marvelous Marshall Hawkins, and on trumpet, the great GIlbert Castellanos, and we're going to play the blues. A little bit about the blues. For me, the blues is an integral part of jazz music. Without the nuance or the sonic information that the blues gives, jazz wouldn't really be jazz. So it's very important. There's no date on it. It perfectly expresses the human condition, and that's why it's still valid and relevant today. So we're going to start out, and we're going to play the blues for you.
Okay, 1, 2. I really want to thank the two of you from the bottom of my heart. You both know how important you are to me, and how much you mean to me, and and for really discussing this very, very important topic. So thank you from the bottom of my heart again.
Thank you. San Diego is blessed that you are.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot coming from you.
Yeah,
Okay,
San
God
Diego.
bless, and Marshall, God bless. I'll talk to you.
Well, you guys are my musical father, mentor figures. So thank you.